The Pokemon TCG has been huge now for almost 30 years, and within that time span, Pokemon has had some pretty big controversies and scandals. And let's start with one of the newest scandals. This is all about the newest set on the horizon, Phantasmal Flames. Phantasmal Flames is going to be the biggest set of the Mega Evolution era. However, I think some fans have gone way too far in trying to be the first to get this new set. A lot of the SIR and Gold variants of the Mega Charizard EX have already been arriving in small card stores and eBay marketplaces. We are likely seeing cards that someone has stolen off of the production line, which means the actual pull rates within Phantasmal Flames will be considerably worse. This is actually kind of similar to our next scandal, the Fusion Strike stolen card scandal. Years ago, I made a video when this image started to circulate on Facebook and Reddit. The image shows hundreds, if not thousands, of secret rare cards from the Sword and Shield Fusion Strike expansion, a set that was kind of well known for having pretty tough pull rates. The card store that was due to receive these cards was very concerned about the sheer number of cards that this guy had brought into them, and knew there was no chance all of these were pack pulled. And sure enough, they were stolen off the production line, leading the card store to contact Pokemon and the man being arrested. This was the largest stolen property returned to Pokemon to this day, and as much as Pokemon tried to claim that it didn't affect pull rates, there were thousands of cards not in circulation as a result of this theft. So it definitely impacted the pull rates quite a bit. On this channel we primarily talk about the physical TCG, and have not yet touched upon TCG Pocket. However, this next scandal does involve TCG Pocket, and it caused quite a stir online. With the release of one of the expansions, named Wisdom of Sea and Sky, Pokemon introduced Lugia and Ho-Oh to TCG Pocket. This was meant to be a big deal. However, some fans began to notice that the Ho-Oh card we have received seemed weirdly similar to artwork created by Ian Juju. The Pokemon company claimed that this was because they gave incorrect materials to the designer, but it did highlight a bigger issue within the TCG app: Pokemon plagiarizing fan art to implement into their app. Pokemon has really strict policies regarding fan art, basically saying if it contains their characters that they can use it. Pokemon recently have clearly had some issues when it comes to management, as the most recent scandal to hit the competitive side of the TCG is the disqualification of Luke Smith at the Milwaukee Regionals. According to Luke Smith's brother, on the first day of the Milwaukee Regionals, Luke was issued a warning for 4 visible imprints of the card through the sleeves that could be seen under the sleeves in the right lighting. The cards that the judges claimed to be warping were not cards of any significance, and Luke initially thought that he could just fight the warning off. However, he was advised by a judge that there was no way to avoid it. He managed to get through the first day of the competition. However, the second day is where things got even worse. He was disqualified after 2 different cards in his deck were allegedly marked or warped. Luke and his team felt that because the cards were hollows, warping was more likely, and if they looked at everyone's deck, that they would find other warped hollows. This bad judge decision caused Luke Smith to miss out on the $3,000 he had won for finishing in a top 8 position, but also the $10,000 he could have won had this DQ not gone through. It's just outrageous how poorly judged these events can be. Luke's brother would take to Twitter following this scandal and give a statement on behalf of Luke, essentially repeating that all holo cards are warped, and that when the deck is stacked, there is not a single card that is lifted or arched compared to others. He also included in his statement that there should be playable non-holo versions of Pheasantipity and Squawkabilly in order to alleviate this issue in the future. He ended their statement saying that the judges need to think critically about the decisions they are making, and consider what the definition of an unfair advantage is. Now, this next scandal does not entirely involve the Pokemon company, but rather a company that is often associated with Pokemon. This next scandal is still an ongoing issue that only began earlier this year: the Pokemon prototype scandal. Prototype cards are meant to be early versions of test prints for popular Pokemon cards. The most famous of these is the test print Blastoise. However, a lot of cards in the history of the TCG have had prototype cards created. However, recent reports have begun to prove that some of the prototype cards were made artificially in the years between 2022 and 2024. The worst part is that despite these cards being fake and artificially created, CGC, or Certified Guarantee Company, has been authenticating these cards as genuine 1996 alpha playtest Pokemon cards. People actually figured out these were fakes quite cleverly. First, they noticed that the printing techniques and quality of these cards was way too modern, suggesting they were created recently as opposed to back in 1996 like they claim. On top of that, some people have gone so far as to analyze the metadata of these cards to prove that they are fake. Most of the evidence points to these cards being fakes, however, a small community of people are still claiming they are in fact real. Unfortunately though, the people who claim these are authentic and real cards have no proof to back up their claims, and that CGC has been authenticating and even grading fake cards. Most of these cards were actually also in auction at the time, and so the auctions were cancelled or put on hold while people would reevaluate and investigate whether these cards were real. But let's go back to a scandal that entirely involves Pokemon: the 2024 Art Contest Pokemon Challenge. Pokemon has been putting on art contests for years. Every year they allow and encourage fans to design their own Pokemon fan art that could then be turned into an official trading card as part of a promotion. The idea seems really cool, and for years was working flawlessly. However, the last few years there has been a scourge on the art community, artificial intelligence or AI. It was confirmed by Pokemon that in the top 300 finalists of the 2024 art contest that some people had broken their rules. And most people took this as used AI enhancements or flat out fully AI generated their designs for the cards. The problem with this though is that technically there was nothing in the rules against using artificial intelligence, although this should have absolutely been the case. The craziest part is that Pokemon had no idea some of the entries were AI generated. It was the fans who raised the point and pointed out that some of the finalists were in fact AI generated designs. So far it doesn't seem that Pokemon is going to put on a 2025 art contest, but this could change in the next couple of months. This next scandal is something that even I in my area have been seeing recently. I live in a pretty populated area, surrounded by multiple Pokemon card stores. However, recently almost every store near me has been hit by a break-in, or forced to add steel bars to their windows to block any break-ins. It's a sad day to be a Pokemon fan when you see these organised attacks on local stores, who just want to contribute to the hobby. This is not exclusive to my area though, as there have been mass break-ins to Pokemon card stores all across America, particularly on the East Coast, with people seeing the potential value of these cards in resale markets. Unfortunately, this seems like a problem Pokemon cards will just have to deal with for a while. And of course, it would not be a scandal video without talking about scalpers. Now, I would love to sit and talk about everything wrong with scalpers and what they've been doing. In fact, I may even make a video on it one day. However, I have decided the best thing for me to focus on is the artificial inflation of the market these scalpers are responsible for. This is primarily an issue in Europe, where sites like Card Market were hit hard by organised Discord groups that would inflate a card's value so that they could then sell those cards at a higher cost. This is a problem that is kind of bleeding all across the world when it comes to Pokemon cards. People are going to stores, scalping products, and then immediately selling them to local card stores for a profit. Scalpers will hopefully leave the hobby soon enough, likely after the 30th anniversary set in February. If they don't though, we'll probably be stuck with them until the next cycle of Pokemon cards. Most of these scandals are still pretty new, so let's head back to a much older controversy from all the way back in 2003, Operation Scorched Earth. Now this may sound like some spy movie plot point, but this was actually an operation carried out by Wizards of the Coast when they lost the Pokemon license. In 2002, Pokemon were preparing to take the Pokemon card name back in-house, and so they began setting up Pokemon USA. They were poaching high-ranking Wizards officials and were planning to release a set themselves before Wizards of the Coast lost the license. This set would be the EX Ruby and Sapphire set. Some people at Wizards were furious. Not only were they being poached, but they would be losing a lot of money because of this contract. And so one person came forward to try and devalue Pokemon cards and sabotage the brand, Vince Calori. This operation had three main points. First, Vince wanted to drop the print quality of Pokemon cards and add blaring issues, such as the best of game Hitmonchan, which had incorrect HP. Then he wanted to flood the market with valuable cards, such as the holos from Aquapolis and Skyridge, which were given out at tournaments in shopping bags filled with them. Thousands of cards from Expedition, Skyridge, and Aquapolis, as well as the Neo sets, were given out at tournaments to try and reduce the market value of these cards. And finally, Vince Calori put on sanctioned Pokemon events with incredibly unfair judges to make the TCG competitive scene borderline unplayable. Honestly, Operation Scorched Earth had so many controversies embedded within it. It just needs its own video to talk about it. So if you want that, let me know in the comments. Our penultimate scandal involves the Pokemon Company website, which has had a big problem for years that they have now only just begun to fix. If you wanted to purchase Pokemon cards on Pokemon Center, you would have to be ready to compete with various bots that immediately grab all of the stock. This is an issue that fans have been complaining about for years, probably since the site first opened. Bot accounts have become a real scourge across the TCG market. These companies do not care who buys the stock, as long as it sells. Pokemon Center has only recently started to do what they can to prevent bots from getting stock, but it doesn't seem to be working very well at the moment. Back in the original series, the print quality of Pokemon cards was actually really good. There were some issues here and there, but for the most part, the cards were fine. However, by the time the Neo era began, Pokemon had ramped up how many cards they wanted in production, and so Wizards had to do the same thing. The Neo cards were massively overprinted, and as a result, the quality of these cards dropped significantly. There was just not enough time to quality control the amount of cards being printed. As such, most of the Neo cards have become really hard to get in a good grade, with one example being the Neo Genesis Typhlosion, with only 12 in a PSA 10 out of 3,000 sent in for grading. If you like this video, please subscribe and check out my Twitch down below.